The maid was dusting the Mafia boss's study when she froze in front of a portrait. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered the words that would change everything. "Sir, this girl. She lived with me in the orphanage. She was my sister. What she didn't know, he'd been searching for that girl for 15 years. And he'd never stopped looking." The crystal tumbler shattered against marble before Sarah even entered the study. She froze in the doorway, dust cloth clutched against her chest, watching expensive whiskey pool like amber blood across the floor. Dante Romano stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid beneath his tailored black suit, staring at something on the wall she couldn't see. "Get out," he said quietly. Sarah had worked in the Romano mansion for exactly 9 days. 9 days of whispered warnings from the other staff. Don't look him in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ever go into the study uninvited. She should have left. But the study hadn't been cleaned in weeks, and Mrs. Chun had specifically told her this morning that Mr. Romano would be out until evening. The broken glass crunched under her shoe as she stepped back. The sound made Dante turn. His face was all sharp angles and cold fury, the kind of expression that had made grown men disappear from the city. At 28, he controlled half the underground operations in 3 states. People didn't disobey Dante Romano. People certainly didn't cry in front of him. "I said," he stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Why are you still here?" "I'm sorry, sir. Mrs. Chin said you were gone. I was just going to." Sarah's voice died in her throat. Because now she could see what he'd been staring at. The portrait hung between 2 floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, illuminated by a single overhead light that made it look like a shrine. A girl, maybe 11 or 12, with dark curls and eyes that seemed too old for her face. She wore a simple blue dress, and around her neck was a delicate silver locket. Sarah's dust cloth fell from her hands. "No," she whispered. Her legs went weak. "No, that's not." The room tilted. She grabbed the back of a leather chair, her vision blurring with tears she couldn't control. A sound escaped her throat, half gasp, half sob, and suddenly she was crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Dante moved toward her, fast and predatory. "Who are you? How do you know her?" Sarah couldn't answer. The tears kept coming, 15 years of them, all at once. The girl in the portrait was smiling, but Sarah remembered the nights she'd cried herself to sleep. Remembered holding her hand during thunderstorms. Remembered the morning she woke up and Lila's bed was empty. "Answer me." Dante's hand closed around her wrist, not painful, but firm. "Dangerous." How do you know my sister?"
"Sister."
The word cut through Sarah's shock like a knife.
"Your
sister?" She looked up at him through her tears, really looked at him for the first time. The same dark hair, the same defiant tilt to the chin. "You're her brother?" "I'm asking the questions." His grip tightened.
"How do you know
her?" Sarah's mind raced. Everyone knew Dante Romano had no family. He'd built his empire alone, trusted no one, showed mercy to nothing. The rumors said he was born cold, that he'd never loved anything except power. But he'd kept this portrait in his private study, where no one else could see. "Sir," Sarah's voice shook. "This girl, Lila, she lived with me in the orphanage, St. Catherine's on the east side. We shared a room for 4 years. Dante went completely still. "We weren't sisters by blood," Sarah continued, words tumbling out faster now. "But we were sisters in every way that mattered. She used to braid my hair. I used to steal extra bread for her at dinner. When the older kids picked on us, we protected each other. Her voice broke. She was the only family I ever had." For a long moment, Dante said nothing. His face had gone carefully blank, the way it did in business meetings before someone died. But his hand trembled slightly where it gripped her wrist. "Lila Romano," he said quietly. "My sister disappeared when I was 13. Taken from our car after our parents were killed. I've spent 15 years searching. 15 years following dead ends and false leads and empty graves." He released Sarah's wrist and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. When he looked at the portrait again, something cracked in his expression. I found this painting in a police evidence box 3 years ago. Some detective thought I should have it. But there was no name attached. No location. No leads. His jaw clenched. Tell me you're not lying to me. Tell me you really knew her. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She used to hum. All the time. This lullaby, I never knew the words, but it was always the same melody.
Soft and sad. She said.
She said her mother used to sing it. Dante's breath caught audibly. She had a scar, Sarah continued, on her left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon, from falling out of a tree when she was 7. And she was terrified of thunderstorms, but she never wanted anyone to know, so she'd hum that lullaby to herself until they passed. Dante turned away, his hands braced against his desk. His shoulders shook once, violently, then went rigid again. When he spoke, his voice was raw. What happened to her? Where is she? I don't know, the words felt like a betrayal. One morning, I woke up and she was gone. The matron said she'd been adopted. By a good family. I tried to find out more, but they wouldn't tell me anything. I was just another orphan. No one listened. Dante was silent for a long time. Then he straightened, and when he turned back to face her, he was all business again. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous. You're going to tell me everything, he said. Every detail you remember. Every conversation. Every person who might know where she went. He walked to the door and locked it. And you're not leaving this room until I believe you. 3 hours later, Sarah's throat was dry and her hands had stopped shaking. Dante had questioned her like a prosecutor. Every memory she shared, he dissected. Every detail, he tested against information only someone who truly knew Lila would have. He'd asked about the color of her favorite sweater, gray, with a small hole in the left sleeve, the name of the stuffed rabbit she slept with, Mr. Buttons, though one of his button eyes was missing, the way she arranged her books, smallest to largest, always. Sarah had answered everything. Now they stood in the garden behind the mansion, away from the cameras, away from the bodyguards who patrolled the grounds. The sun had set an hour ago, and the only light came from the villa's windows and the half-moon overhead. Tell me about the adoption again, Dante said. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves. Somehow that made him look more dangerous, not less. You said it was sudden. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. The night air was cold. It was the middle of winter. December. Lila and I had been planning to stay together. There was a program for older kids, ones who were too old for most families to want. We were going to apply together when we turned 18-inch. But one Tuesday morning, the matron called her into the office. When Lila came back to our room, she was crying. Happy crying, I thought. Sarah's voice went quiet. She said a family wanted her. A good family. With money and a big house. She said she was finally going to have a real home. Did you meet them?
No.
Everything happened so fast. They came that afternoon. I wasn't allowed in the office during the meeting. And then Sarah swallowed hard. Then she was gone. She hugged me, told me she'd write, told me she'd come back to visit. But she never did. Dante pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. What was the family's name? I don't know. The matron wouldn't tell me. Said it was confidential. For the child's safety. Confidential. Dante's laugh was bitter. That's not how legal adoptions work. Not in this state. He started pacing, the way Sarah imagined predators paced in cages. Someone paid for silence. Someone made sure there was no trail. Which means they didn't want her found. The implication hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt sick. You think something bad happened to her? I think someone who legally adopts a child doesn't need to hide their name. Dante stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Unless they weren't planning to raise her. Unless they wanted her for something else. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. Trafficking. Labor. Worse things she didn't want to name. But she was happy, Sarah said desperately. When she left, she was happy. She believed. Children believe what they're told. Dante's voice was flat. Especially children who've never had anything. You tell them they're getting a family, they'll follow you anywhere. Sarah wanted to argue but couldn't. Because he was right. She'd seen it before at St. Catherine's. Kids so desperate for love they ignored every red flag, every warning sign. There was something else, Sarah said suddenly. The memory had been buried for years, but now it surfaced sharp and clear. The lullaby. The one she always hummed. The last time I saw her, right before she left, she grabbed my hand and made me promise to remember it. She said, "If I ever forget who I am, this will help me remember." Dante went very still. "Sing it." "I can't sing, hum it then."
Now.
Sarah closed her eyes and let the melody come. It was simple, haunting. The kind of song that sounded like it had existed forever, passed down through generations. She hummed 8 bars, then stopped. When she opened her eyes, Dante had turned away from her. His hands were clenched at his sides. "My mother sang that every night," he said roughly. "When Lila couldn't sleep. When she had nightmares. It was the last thing our mother did the night she died. She sang it to Lila one more time." He turned back to face Sarah, and in the moonlight, she saw something break in his expression. Something human underneath all that controlled fury. "I looked for her everywhere," he said. "I built this entire empire, so I'd have the resources to find her. So I'd have the power to bring her home. And she was in an orphanage 20 minutes from where we lived."
20
minutes. "You were a kid too," Sarah said quietly. "You couldn't have." "I should have found her." His voice turned sharp again, self-directed and vicious. "I should have torn the city apart brick by brick." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Dante pulled out his phone again and made a call.
"Marco."
"I need you to pull every file on St. Catherine's Orphanage, East Side. Every adoption record from 12 to 15 years ago. I don't care if they're sealed. I don't care if you have to bribe a judge or break into City Hall. I want them by morning." He ended the call and looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're not a maid anymore," he said. "As of right now, you're under my personal protection. No one in this house touches you. No one questions you. No one gives you orders except me. Understood?"
Sarah nodded slowly.
"Good." Dante started walking back toward the mansion. "Because tomorrow, we're going to find out exactly what happened to my sister. And if someone hurt her..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The community records office smelled like old paper and bureaucratic neglect. Sarah stood beside Dante in the narrow hallway, watching him study the building like he was planning an invasion. 2 of his men waited in the car outside, close enough to help, far enough not to draw attention. Dante had insisted on discretion. He'd even worn ordinary clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, nothing that screamed money or danger. He still looked like a threat. "Let me do the talking," Sarah said quietly. "Mrs. Kowalski has been the matron at St. Catherine's for 30 years. If she sees you coming in aggressive..." "I'm not going to hurt an old woman." "That's not what I mean." Sarah touched his arm carefully. "She'll shut down. She's protective of the kids, even the ones who've aged out. If she thinks you're dangerous, she won't tell us anything." Dante looked like he wanted to argue. Then he nodded once, sharp.
"Fine."
"You lead. But if I think she's lying, then you let me handle it." They walked into the office together. Mrs. Kowalski looked up from her desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She was exactly as Sarah remembered, gray hair pulled into a practical bun, cardigan with patches on the elbows, eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes widened when she saw Sarah.
"Sarah Mitchell?"
The matron stood up slowly. "My God, I haven't seen you in... It must be 10 years. 11, Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Hi, Mrs. K. Look at you. All grown up." Mrs. Kowalski's gaze shifted to Dante, and something changed in her expression. Wariness. "And who's this?" "A friend. We're looking for information about someone who used to live at St. Catherine's." "Lila." Sarah paused, glancing at Dante. She'd never known Lila's last name. She was adopted about 15 years ago. December. Mrs. Kowalski's face went carefully neutral. Sarah, you know I can't discuss. Lila Romano, Dante said quietly. His voice was controlled, but Sarah heard the edge underneath. That's my family name. I'm her brother. The matron's hand went to her throat. Romano, she whispered. You're
Dante Romano.
Yes, he stepped forward. I've been searching for my sister for 15 years. I know she was here. I know she was adopted. I need to see the files. Mrs. Kowalski sat back down heavily. Her hands were shaking. Mr. Romano, this is highly irregular. Adoption records are confidential, and I don't have the authority to. Please, Sarah interrupted, moving between them. Mrs. K, you remember Lila. She shared my room. You remember how close we were. I just want to know she's okay. That she's safe. That's all. The matron looked at Sarah for a long moment. Then she sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 60-some years. Wait here, she said quietly. She disappeared into a back room. Sarah heard filing cabinets opening, papers rustling. Dante stood motionless beside her, tension radiating off him like heat.
Brett sera whispered.
I am breathing. No, you're planning how many ways you can make someone disappear. I can tell. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. You've known me for less than 24 hours. Long enough. Mrs. Kowalski returned carrying a thin manila folder. She set it on the desk, but kept her hand on top of it. Before I show you this, she said, looking directly at Dante, I need you to understand something. I love that girl. Every child who comes through St. Catherine's, I love them. But Lila, her voice softened. Lila was special.
Kind.
Gentle. When she left, I believed she was going somewhere better. Who adopted her? Dante's voice was tight. Mrs. Kowalski opened the folder. The first page showed Lila's intake photo, the same face from the portrait, but younger. Thinner.
Sadder.
Sarah's chest ached looking at it. The second page showed the adoption decree. Sarah leaned forward, reading quickly. Adoptive family. The Castellane Foundation. Not a family. A foundation. What is this? Dante's voice had gone dangerous. A foundation can't adopt a child. It was a special circumstance, Mrs. Kowalski said quickly. They ran group homes for older children. Educational facilities. The social worker assured me it was legitimate, that Lila would receive excellent care and schooling. Where? Dante grabbed the folder. Where did they take her? He flipped through the pages. Sarah watched his expression darken with each one. Because after the adoption decree, there was nothing. No medical records showing regular checkups. No school enrollment forms. No progress reports. No follow-up visits from social services. The file just ended, as if Lila had vanished the moment she left St. Catherine's. This isn't right, Sarah said. There should be more. There's always more documentation for adoptions. There should be, Mrs. Kowalski agreed quietly. I've thought about it over the years. Wondered. But I was told everything was handled by their private physicians, their private tutors. I had no reason to doubt. You had every reason. Dante's voice was cold. This isn't an adoption. It's an erasure. He pulled out his phone and photographed every page in the folder. The Castellane Foundation, he said. Where are they located? Mrs. Kowalski shook her head. The address on file was in the city. But I drove past it 5 years ago, just curious. The building was abandoned.
Condemned.
There was nothing there. Dante looked at Sarah. His eyes were dark with something that might have been fear, if he allowed himself to feel it. Someone took her, he said quietly. And then they made sure no one could follow.
Sera stomach twisted.
But why? Why go through all this trouble for one 12-year-old girl? Dante didn't answer. But from the look on his face, Sarah knew he was wondering the same thing, and that every possible answer was worse than the last. Dante spent 2 days chasing ghosts. The Castellane Foundation had been dissolved 13 years ago. The The board members were either dead or unreachable. The building had been demolished. Every lead turned into smoke. On the third morning, Sarah found him in his study, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, looking like he hadn't slept. "You need to rest," she said from the doorway. "I need to find her." Sarah walked in and started gathering the empty cups. "You're not going to find anything staring at the same documents for the 50th time.
Sometimes you need to step back.
Look at things differently." Dante looked up at her, exhaustion making him almost human. "And how do you suggest I do that?" "Come with me," Sarah said. "There's something I just remembered." An hour later, they stood in the middle of the city's largest public market. Dante looked wildly out of place among the fruit vendors and spice stalls, but he'd agreed to come without his bodyguards. Just him and Sarah, two ordinary people in a crowd. "Why are we here?" he asked. Sarah scanned the market stalls, searching. Lila had a scarf. Blue, with white embroidery. Flowers and birds, really intricate work. She wore it every single day, even in summer. She said. Sarah paused, remembering. She said it was the only thing she had from before. From her real life. Dante went still. "My mother made that scarf.
She spent months on it.
It was supposed to be a birthday present. Lila kept it safe for years. But the pattern was distinctive. I've never seen anything like it anywhere else." Sarah pointed toward the far end of the market. "Except here. 2 years ago, I came to this market and saw a vendor selling scarves with the exact same pattern. I almost bought one, but they were expensive and she shook her head. I should have asked questions then. But I was scared. Scared of hoping." They moved through the crowd together. The market was busy. Vendors shouting prices, customers haggling, children weaving between the stalls. The air smelled like fresh bread and coffee and humanity. Sarah stopped at a small stall tucked between a spice vendor and a woman selling pottery. An elderly woman sat behind a display of hand-embroidered scarves, each one more beautiful than the last. But it was the blue one that made Sarah's breath catch. Identical. The same flowers. The same birds. The same delicate stitching. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly. "These scarves are beautiful. Do you make them yourself?" The vendor looked up and smiled. "Some of them. But the blue ones, those are special. I copy them from an original design. A customer's request." Dante moved closer, his intensity barely contained. "What customer?" The woman blinked, suddenly uncertain. Well, I don't usually discuss." "Please," Sarah interrupted gently. "It's important. Someone I loved used to have a scarf just like this. I've been trying to find her for years." The vendor's expression softened. "The young woman who commissioned these, she came to me about 8 years ago. She had an old scarf, worn, faded, but the pattern was exquisite. She asked if I could recreate it. Said it was from her childhood. That she wanted to keep the design alive." 8 years ago, Dante said quietly. His hands were clenched at his sides. "What did she look like?" "Dark hair."
Pretty.
Quiet. The vendor studied them carefully. "She had sad eyes. The kind of sadness that lives deep, you know?
But she was always polite.
Always kind. She'd come every few months, buy a new scarf, and we'd talk a little." "Where is she now?" Sarah asked. "She moved. Maybe a year ago? She told me she'd gotten a job as a teacher in a coastal town. Said she wanted to be near the ocean. That it made her feel peaceful." The vendor reached under her table and pulled out a worn notebook. "I still have her information. She said if anyone ever asked about the scarves, I could. Well, I suppose I could share it." She wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to Sarah. "Lila Chun. Brookhaven Coastal School. Brookhaven, North Coast. Not Lila Romano. Lila Chun." She'd changed her name. Dante stared at the paper like it might disappear. His voice came out rough. "Are you certain this is the same woman? The one who had the original scarf?" "I kept it," the vendor said quietly. "The original. She let me hold on to it for reference. Said it was too fragile to keep carrying around, but she trusted me with it. Would you like to see?" She pulled out a small cloth bundle from a locked box beneath her table. When she unwrapped it, Sarah's eyes filled with tears. The scarf was faded, the blue nearly gray from age and washing. But the embroidery was unmistakable, and in the corner, stitched in tiny letters almost too small to see. For my Lila. Love, Mama. Dante reached out, then stopped, his hand hovering over the fabric. He didn't touch it, as if touching it might make it real, and real things could be lost again. She's alive, he whispered. She's alive, Sarah confirmed, wiping her eyes. And she's teaching children. She's safe. Dante pulled out his wallet and took out every bill inside, easily $2,000. He set it on the vendor's table. For the scarf, he said, and the information, and for taking care of it all these years. The vendor's eyes widened. Sir, this is too much. It's not nearly enough. He picked up the scarf carefully, reverently, and folded it into his jacket pocket. Then he looked at Sarah, and for the first time since she'd met him, Dante Romano smiled. We're going to the coast, he said. Now. Right now. They left at dawn. Dante drove, not the expensive sports car Sarah had seen in the mansion's garage, but a simple black sedan that wouldn't draw attention. 2 guards followed in a separate vehicle, far enough back to give them space. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, watching the city disappear behind them as they headed north toward the coast. The morning light turned everything gold, and for the first time in days, she felt something close to hope. Dante had been silent for the first hour, both hands on the wheel, jaw tight. But as the buildings gave way to trees and open road, something in him seemed to loosen. Tell me more about her, he said suddenly. From the orphanage. What was she like? Sarah shifted in her seat, surprised. You really want to know? I missed 12 years of her life. I'd like to understand who she became. Sarah thought about how to explain Lila, the girl who'd been her whole world once. She was gentle, Sarah said finally. Almost too gentle for a place like St. Catherine's. The other kids could be cruel, especially to the quiet ones. But Lila never fought back. She'd just absorb it, take it, and then later, when they weren't looking, she'd do something kind for them. Leave a piece of candy on their pillow. Help them with homework. That sounds like her. Dante's voice was soft. When we were kids, I was always getting into fights, coming home with black eyes and bloody knuckles. And Lila would patch me up and tell me violence didn't fix anything. He laughed quietly. I clearly didn't listen. You built an empire looking for her, Sarah pointed out. That's not nothing. I built an empire because I was angry, because I felt powerless. Dante's hands tightened on the wheel. After our parents died, after Lila was taken, I was sent to live with an uncle who didn't want me. He made that very clear. So I left at 16. Started working for people who didn't ask questions. Learned how the real world worked. And now you run half the city. Now I run half the city, he agreed. And I still couldn't find my sister. They drove in silence for a while. The road curved along a river, sunlight dancing on the water. She used to tell stories, Sarah said. At night, when the younger kids couldn't sleep, Lila would make up these elaborate fairy tales. Princesses who saved themselves. Dragons who were just lonely. She had this way of making everything sound magical, even when we were in that cold, drafty building eating stale bread. My mother was like that. Dante's voice caught slightly. She'd turn everything into an adventure. Grocery shopping became a quest. Cleaning our rooms became a battle against the dust monsters. Lila inherited that from her. She talked about your mother sometimes, Sarah said carefully. Never your father, but your mother. She'd describe her smile, her laugh, the way she smelled like lavender and vanilla. Dante was quiet for so long Sarah thought she'd said something wrong. I forget sometimes, he said finally, what my mother's laugh sounded like. It's been 17 years. The memories fade. He glanced at Sarah. Does that make me a terrible son? It makes you human. They stopped for gas and coffee at a small station 2 hours into the drive. While Dante filled the tank, Sarah stretched her legs and studied the map. Brookhaven was still 3 hours away, a tiny coastal town that probably had one school, one grocery store, and more seagulls than people. A good place to disappear. A good place to heal. When they got back on the road, Dante was the one who broke the silence this time. "What are you hoping happens when we find her?" he asked. Sarah considered the question. "I want to know she's okay. That she's happy. That whatever happened after she left St. Catherine's didn't break her. And if it did, then we help her heal." Sarah looked at him. "What are you hoping?" Dante didn't answer right away. The road stretched ahead of them, empty and endless. "I'm hoping she forgives me," he said quietly, "for not finding her sooner, for letting her go through whatever she went through alone. You were a kid. You were grieving. I should have done better." His voice was firm, self-directed, and harsh. "I'm her big brother. I was supposed to protect her. You're protecting her now. 15 years too late." Sarah wanted to argue, but she understood. Guilt wasn't logical. It didn't care about circumstances or impossible situations. It just existed, heavy and permanent. "She used to talk about you," Sarah said. "Not by name. She never told me she had a brother. But sometimes she'd mention someone brave from before. Someone who made her feel safe. She'd say, 'I hope he's okay, wherever he is.'" Dante's jaw clenched. "She worried about me? Always. Even when she was scared herself, she worried about other people." That's who Lila was. They drove through small towns and farmland, past signs for beaches and seafood restaurants. The air changed as they got closer to the coast. Salter, fresher, full of possibility. "What if she doesn't remember me?" Dante asked suddenly. His voice was barely audible. "She was so young when she was taken. What if I'm just a stranger to her?" Sarah reached over and touched his arm gently. "Then you remind her, one memory at a time. That's what family does." Dante nodded, but Sarah saw his hands trembling slightly on the wheel. They were 2 hours from Brookhaven when Dante said, almost himself, "I used to call her my little warrior, because she was small but fierce, because nothing scared her." "Maybe she'll remember that," Sarah said softly. "Maybe," Dante whispered. But he didn't sound convinced. Brookhaven was exactly what Sarah had imagined, a postcard town with weathered buildings, salt-stained docks, and the constant cry of seagulls overhead. The school sat on a small hill overlooking the ocean, a 2-story building painted cheerful yellow with blue trim. A hand-painted sign out front read, "Brookhaven Coastal School, where every child matters." Dante parked across the street, engine off, hands still gripping the wheel. "She's in there," he said. His voice sounded hollow. Sarah looked at the school. Through the windows, she could see classrooms with colorful posters and children's artwork. The playground beside the building had swings and a small garden where kids were planting something, their teacher kneeling beside them. The teacher had dark hair pulled into a practical braid.
Dante sera whispered.
Look, he'd already seen her. Lila Romano, stood up from the garden, brushing dirt from her jeans. She was small, maybe 5'3", wearing a simple gray sweater and worn sneakers. Nothing about her screamed wealth or privilege. She looked like someone who'd chosen simplicity, chosen peace. A little girl tugged on her sleeve, holding up a seedling. Lila crouched down again, smiling, and helped the child plant it carefully. She said something that made the girl laugh, then gently brushed soil off the child's nose. Sarah heard Dante's breath catch. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "She looks just like our mother." Sarah could see it now, the kindness in Lila's expression, the gentle way she moved. But there was something else too. A wariness in the way she glanced around, a tension in her shoulders even when she smiled. Someone who'd learned to always be alert. Someone who'd survived something. "We should go to her," Sarah said. "She's right there." But Dante didn't move. Another teacher called from the doorway, and Lila waved back. She helped the children wash their hands at an outdoor spigot, laughing as they splashed water at each other. Then she led them inside, disappearing from view. Dante. Sarah touched his arm. What's wrong? Look at her, he said.
She's happy.
She has a life here. A good life. Kids who love her. Purpose, his voice went rough. What right do I have to walk in there and destroy that? You wouldn't be destroying anything. You're her brother. I'm a stranger. Dante finally released the steering wheel and turned to face her. She doesn't know me, Sarah. She was 7 when her parents died.
7.
I'm not her big brother anymore. I'm a dangerous man who runs a criminal empire. What am I supposed to say? Hi, I'm the brother you don't remember, and by the way, I've spent the last 15 years becoming exactly the kind of person our parents would have been ashamed of. That's not fair. You did what you had to. I did what I wanted, his voice turned sharp. Don't make me noble. I chose this life. I chose power over everything else. And maybe, somewhere deep down, I chose it because being powerful meant never being helpless again. Never losing anyone again. He looked back at the school. But that didn't work either, did it? Sarah didn't know what to say. They sat in silence, watching the school. Children played during recess. Teachers supervised. Life continued, ordinary and beautiful. After a long moment, Dante spoke again, quieter now. What if we're wrong? What if she doesn't want to be found? What if she changed her name and moved here specifically to get away from her past? Or maybe she moved here to heal from whatever the Castellane Foundation did to her, Sarah countered. Maybe she's been waiting for someone to find her, to tell her she wasn't forgotten. Or maybe she's built a life where she finally feels safe, and I'm about to take that away. The school bell rang. Children poured out for lunch, their laughter carrying across the street. Lila emerged with them, carrying a lunch bag. But instead of eating with the other teachers, she walked toward the beach path that ran behind the school. Alone. She always did that, Sarah said suddenly. At St. Catherine's. She'd take her meals outside when the cafeteria got too loud. Said she needed quiet sometimes to think. They watched Lila follow the path until she reached a bench overlooking the water. She sat down, opened her lunch, and stared out at the ocean. From this distance, Sarah couldn't see her expression. But something about her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward, the way she seemed to fold into herself, suggested deep loneliness. She's by herself, Dante said quietly. She's always been by herself, Sarah replied. Even in a room full of people. Dante was silent for a long moment. Then he opened his car door. Where are you going? Sarah asked. To my sister, he paused. But I'm not going to force anything. We approach carefully. We let her decide. If she wants us gone, his voice wavered. Then we leave. We respect that. And if she doesn't remember you? Dante pulled the faded blue scarf from his jacket pocket, the one the vendor had kept all these years. His mother's handiwork. Lila's treasure. Then maybe this will help, he said.
He looked at Sarah.
You should go first. She knows you. She trusts you. I'll stay back until he swallowed hard. Until she's ready. If she's ever ready. Sarah nodded and got out of the car. Together, they crossed the street and followed the path toward the beach. Toward the woman who'd been lost for 15 years. Toward the truth of what happened to Lila Romano. The beach path was quiet except for the sound of waves and crying gulls. Sarah walked slowly, Dante several paces behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What if Lila didn't recognize her? What if 15 years had erased everything? What if? Lila turned her head. Their eyes met. For a moment, nothing happened. Lila just stared, lunch forgotten in her lap, expression unreadable. Then her face transformed, confusion shifting to shock, shock to recognition, recognition to something that looked like breaking.
Sarah?
The name came out as barely a whisper.
Lila.
Lila stood up so fast her lunch scattered across the bench. She took one step forward, then stopped, hand pressed to her mouth. Tears were already streaming down her face. Oh my God. Oh my God. It's really you. It's really me. They closed the distance in seconds. Lila crashed into Sarah's arms, and they were both crying, both laughing, holding each other like they were afraid to let go. Lila was smaller than Sarah remembered, more fragile, but her grip was fierce. I looked for you, Lila sobbed into Sarah's shoulder. After I got away, I went back to St. Catherine's, but you were gone. They said you aged out. They wouldn't tell me where. I looked for you too. For years. I never stopped wondering. They pulled back just enough to see each other's faces. Lila's eyes, those same eyes from the portrait, were red-rimmed and searching. How did you find me? How did you even know where to look? I had help, Sarah said carefully. She glanced back. Dante stood about 20 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking like he wanted to run. The ocean wind caught his dark hair. From this distance, with the sun behind him, he could have been anyone. But Lila's gaze had already found him. Her entire body went rigid. Who is that? Lila, Sarah said gently. He's been looking for you. For 15 years. I don't understand. Lila's voice turned wary. Who is he? Dante took a single step forward, then stopped. Even from here, Sarah could see he was trembling. You don't remember me, he said quietly. His voice barely carried over the sound of waves. I didn't think you would. You were so young. Lila stared at him. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, then concentration, like she was trying to solve a puzzle in her mind. You have to go, she said suddenly. Both of you. I can't. People can't know I'm here. If they find me, no one's going to hurt you, Dante said, and the protective edge in his voice made Lila flinch. You don't understand. You don't know what they did. The Castellane Foundation, Dante interrupted. I know about them. I know they took you. I've spent 3 days trying to find out what happened after that, but the trail went cold. He took another step closer. Lila, I need you to understand something. No one is ever going to hurt you again. Not while I'm breathing. Why? Lila's voice broke. Why would you care? You don't even know me. Yes, I do. Dante pulled the faded blue scarf from his jacket and held it up. Lila's breath caught audibly. Mama made this, Dante said softly. She worked on it every night for months. She wanted it to be perfect. She wanted you to have something beautiful, something that would keep you warm, something that would remind you that you were loved. Lila's hand went to her throat. How do you have that? How? You commission copies. From a vendor in the city market. She kept the original safe for you. Dante's voice was shaking now. Mama used to sing to you. Every night. That lullaby. The one you hummed to yourself when you were scared. Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks. She'd sing it, and I'd sit outside your room doing homework, and I'd hear you both through the door. Dante took another step. And I'd think about how lucky I was. To have a little sister who was braver than me.
Kinder than me.
Better than me in every way that mattered. Dante. Lila whispered. The name, his name, spoken in her voice, nearly broke him. Yeah, he said roughly. It's me, your big brother. The one who failed you. You were just a kid. Lila's voice was barely audible. So were you. They stood staring at each other across the sand. Sarah watched, tears streaming down her own face, as 15 years of grief and loss and desperate searching collapsed into this one fragile moment. You called me your little warrior, Lila said suddenly. Because I wasn't afraid of anything. Because I told you I was going to grow up and fight dragons. Dante let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You really did remember. Not everything. Not for a long time. They tried to make me forget. They said my past wasn't real, that I'd imagine my family, that I was just an orphan who'd made up stories. Lila's voice turned bitter. But I kept the scarf. And the lullaby. And this feeling that someone out there was looking for me. Every day, Dante said. I looked for you every single day. Lila took a step toward him. Then another. Then she was running and Dante caught her, and they were holding each other the way they probably should have 15 years ago, when their parents died and the world fell apart. Sarah turned away to give them privacy. But she heard Lila's whispered question, Can I come home now? And Dante's broken answer. You never left. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in the doorway of a small cottage watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. The house wasn't much, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that had seen better days, a porch that creaked when you walked on it. But it sat on a hill overlooking Brookhaven, close enough to the school that Lila could walk to work, close enough to the town that nothing felt isolated. Not a mansion, not a cage, just a home. The movers finished an hour ago, Dante said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of tea. Lila's upstairs unpacking. She keeps stopping to look out the window, like she can't believe the ocean's really there. Can you blame her? Sarah took the tea gratefully. After everything she told us about those years. They both fell silent. Lila had shared her story in pieces over the past 2 weeks. How the Castellane Foundation had been a front for wealthy families who wanted domestic staff they could mold from childhood. How she'd spent years essentially imprisoned, trained to be invisible, trained to serve, trained to believe she had no other value. How she'd finally escaped at 19, taking nothing but the scarf and a desperate need to disappear. She'd changed her name, found work in restaurants, put herself through community college, eventually became a teacher because she wanted to give children the kindness no one had given her. Dante had listened to all of it with a carefully controlled expression. But Sarah had seen his hands clench, had seen the fury building behind his eyes. The foundation is gone, Sarah said quietly. The people who ran it are either dead or in prison on other charges. You checked. I did more than check, Dante's voice was cold. I made sure anyone even remotely connected knows that Lila Romano is under my protection. That if anyone so much as looks at her wrong, they'll answer to me. Very brotherly of you. I'm serious, Sarah. I know you are. That's what worries me. She touched his arm gently. Lila doesn't need a bodyguard. She needs a brother. There's a difference. Dante was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. I'm still figuring out how to do that. Be a brother instead of what I am. You're learning. That's what matters. Footsteps on the stairs made them both turn. Lila appeared, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater that made her look impossibly young. I found plates, she announced.
Actual mashing plats.
Dante, you didn't have to buy new everything. You needed furniture, Dante said defensively. I had furniture. You had a futon and a card table, which was fine for me. Well, it's not fine for me, Dante's voice softened. Let me do this. Please. Lila looked like she wanted to argue. Then she smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. Okay. Thank you. You're welcome. But if you buy me a car, I'm selling it. I wasn't going to. Dante.
Fine.
No car, he paused. What about a bike? Lila laughed, and the sound was so genuine, so full of life, that Sarah felt her eyes sting with tears. Come on, Lila said. Dinner's almost ready. Sarah, you're staying, right? If you want me to. Of course I want you to. You think I'm going to let you disappear again? Lila grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. Your family. You don't get to leave. The kitchen was small but bright, windows overlooking the ocean. Lila had made pasta, simple, nothing fancy, the kind of meal you made when you were cooking for people you cared about rather than trying to impress anyone. They sat around the small wooden table, the 3 of them, and for a moment no one spoke. It felt surreal.
Impossible.
2 weeks ago, Lila had been lost. Now she was here, passing the salad, asking Dante if he wanted more bread, teasing Sarah about her terrible sense of direction. I still can't believe you got lost in the grocery store yesterday, Lila said, grinning. It has 4 aisles. It's not my fault they all look the same, Sarah protested. They're labeled. The labels are confusing. Dante watched them bicker with something that might have been contentment on his face. He'd been staying in Brookhaven for the past 2 weeks, running his business remotely, making sure Lila had everything she needed. Tomorrow he'd return to the city for a few days. But he'd be back. He'd always be back. So what happens now? Lila asked suddenly, looking between them. I mean, what's normal supposed to look like? I don't think any of us knows normal, Sarah said honestly. But we can figure it out, Dante added.
Together.
If that's what you want. Lila was quiet for a moment, twirling pasta on her fork. I spent so many years alone, believing I had no one, that I'd never have a family again. She looked up, eyes bright. And now I have both of you. It feels like a dream. It's real, Sarah promised. Very real, Dante agreed. And incredibly permanent. You're stuck with us now. Good, Lila whispered. I don't want to be unstuck. They finished dinner as the sun set completely, the cottage filling with warm lamplight. They washed dishes together, Lila washing, Sarah drying, Dante putting things away in the wrong cabinets until Lila reorganized them. They argued about what movie to watch. They ate ice cream straight from the container. They fell asleep on the couch together, Lila in the middle, her head on Sarah's shoulder, her hand holding Dante's. A family restored, not through force or grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through quiet moments, shared meals, the patient work of learning to trust again. Three people who'd been broken and lost now slowly, gently becoming whole. Together.